God preserve our alma mater, Williston forevermore. In the sunshine of thy favor, guard her, keep her, we implore. In the light that never faileth, lead her on from truth to truth. May her foster children ever loyal service yield to thee, minding still her ancient watchword, Christo ecclesias, that where'er our warfare lead us, through the battle bear us down, and we win no wreath of laurel, hers may be the victor's crown. Here today upon her altars we present our sacrifice, though tomorrow widely sundered, still may our prayer arise. God preserve our alma mater, Williston forevermore. In the sunshine of thy favor, guard her, keep her, we implore.
Griffin Boynton, everybody. That was a surprise. I just found out a couple minutes ago, so this isn't going to be easy. Obviously, thank you all for coming. Williston's been great for us. Mom's had a lot of stuff to go through the last few months, and this has weighed on her mind, and they've been unbelievable. So I want to thank Eric Yates, Tammy Niels Walker, who else is in here? We go. Steve Hoyt, Mark Conroy, of course, who's been great, and Coach Beaton was awesome. Augie and I went and spoke with the team last night, so we got a little bit of a taste of what we're in for this afternoon, and a little to reminisce back about what it was like 35 or 50 years ago, as Augie may be. So we're here to celebrate Rick's life, and he meant how much I've heard just coming in the door today of what he meant to people. Could have changed my entire speech today, because, and I just can't add it. We're trying to keep this as brief as possible, but I'm just going to there are going to be, I think, 10 speakers. I will come up and finish off, but I want them to give their points before I get to mine, because I don't want to double anything up, and I want to get through this without crying my eyes out in front of all you people. So there are, 10 speakers. We changed it up a little bit, but just to throw a wrench, we're going to start with the only female in the group. So we got Rachel August Horn to come up and talk to us.
And also probably the shortest in the group, but that's okay. Welcome, everyone. I met Rick late in my senior year at UMass while looking for a 12-credit internship to finish out my sports management degree. I had contacted a few ADs at nearby prep schools with the goal of finding someone who was interested in teaching me all they had learned in their entire career in 4 short months. Rick was nice enough to entertain the idea and agreed to an interview. We sat and chatted for about 30 minutes when he said, "Well, I haven't had an intern in a while, but I don't see why not." And I looked around thinking, shouldn't you get this approved by your head of school or someone? Apparently, Rick Francis did not think that was necessary. A few weeks passed. My second term was beginning in just a few days, and we had not yet confirmed a start date. I called to find out when I should report for my first day. I called and called and called. I thought I had been tricked. There was no internship. This guy had been fired. He finally went to the boss and they said, no way. 2 weeks later, Rick came back to school after a 3-week-long holiday break and we made a plan. I thought to myself, this prep school AD gig seems really cushy. Little did I know. On my desk in the small office across the hall from Rick's was a pile of manila file folders waiting for me when I got there on my first day. Rubber bands held the massive stack of Xeroxed, carbon-copied, and handwritten notes together. The thing was, well, it was as big as Big Rick. On the top was a Post-it note that read, Doug Parker Wrestling. I went to a small girls' knapsack school and had never even seen a wrestling match before. Why put a college student who had never been to a school that had a wrestling program in charge of one of the biggest events in the league? Because that is how we grow. Big Rick, lesson number 1, if they want to learn, teach them. I quickly learned from Rick's posture and tone what kind of day he was having. He would look up from his desk over his glasses and say, yes? Well, those were the days I did not ask any questions. But if I walked in and he said, how goes it? I knew that we were going to have a different type of conversation. Big Rick, lesson number 2, learn how to read the room and think before you speak. During one of these conversations, he asked what I did in the summertime, and when I mentioned I manage a small swimming program in my hometown, he perked up. I still chuckle when I think about his next question because since then, I cannot count the number of times I have asked the same question myself. Oh, are you lifeguard and WSI certified? Because I had already solidified a job for the fall, I felt it reasonable that I go to Cape Cod for the summer when Rick suggested I apply for a position at the summer camp he was affiliated with. It was just one summer, what's the harm in that? So blatantly ignoring my parents' opinion on the matter, I followed Rick to the Cape Cod Sea Camps. In August of that summer, the AD who I was slated to work under at my alma mater suddenly resigned. And in front of me was the opportunity of a lifetime as I was offered the job as interim AD. First, I called my parents, and then I walked to Rick's office and asked him what he thought. Could I even do this job? Who knew? But no one would ever know if I didn't take the position. Big Rick, lesson number 3, go get him, Tiger. There's no doubt that the pace and direction of my professional path was set with help from Rick. And for this, I am deeply thankful. I remember attending my first Knapsack District 4 meeting. I was relieved when I saw Rick sitting at a table in front of the room and went over to talk to him. We chatted for a bit, and when the meeting was about to begin, he politely asked me to now go sit at another table, because the head table was for officers only. Apparently, just knowing Rick Francis was not enough. You had to be Rick Francis. I am proud and honored to have followed in Rick's footsteps from camp to school and back. And he was proud when I called to tell him that I had earned my own seat in the front of the room at the NEPSAC meetings. Big Rick, lesson number 4, be proud, be thankful. Rick was a guy you didn't mess with. His presence alone was enough to make any college student's knees wobble when they entered his office. If there was a counselor who wasn't happy with their schedule, Rick would look up the staff member's application, point out that in fact they had checked the box, that they showed interest in teaching archery and woodworking, and state directly, you signed the damn contract. This is where my camp school crossover was clutch. You see, I knew when not to mess with Rick, but I also knew that he had a soft spot for hardworking young people. Big Rick lesson number 5, do your job even if it means winging it every once in a while. One of Rick's responsibilities as program director at the Sea Camps was to read the counselor reports before they were sent home to families. As you can imagine, this would quickly learn to steam expelling from the big ears of Big Rick himself. Big Rick lesson number 6, grammar matters. He would do his best to explain to the well-intentioned sleepy counselors at our 7 a.m. meetings, a person cannot be described as an emotion. Therefore, Susie was not a pleasure to have in the cabin all summer. Instead, it was a pleasure to have Susie in the cabin all summer. Bemused, the counselors would peek from behind their Ray-Bans. To be honest, to this day, I'm not entirely sure what he was talking about, but I can say that I have never described anyone as an emotion. With Rick's guidance and support, 3 months working here at Williston paved the way to 22 years of athletic administration under my belt before my 45th birthday, and 1 summer in Brewster turned into 25 summers at camp, and the last 5 in Rick's seat as program director. Like Grant Koch giving Marilyn the okay to go out with Rick, I got the okay from Rick to go out with my now husband of 22 years. My last and most moving memory of Rick was the day I witnessed just how much this big, tough guy loved his wife of more than 60 years. Marilyn and I were visiting Rick late last winter, and at the time Marilyn was unable to drive, and a few weeks had passed since their last visit. The look of pure, honest, unconditional love on the man's face when he saw Marilyn will go down as top 5 in my memory of Viewmaster. Big Rick lesson number 7, and the most important of all, love deeply. Love the people in your life, and love what you do. With deep appreciation and love to the Francis family for asking me to speak today, and for sharing Rick with me and my family for 25 years. Rick's lessons live in me, as I'm sure they do in many of you. If they want to learn, teach them. Read the room before you speak. Grammar matters. Have the confidence to wing it. Be proud, be thankful, love deeply, and when in doubt, take a deep breath and go get 'em, Tiger.
Hi, I'm John Curtis, class of 1959. When I arrived on campus in the fall of '58, I knew we were going to get a new coach. I'd heard that much. And I looked over at a tree, and the guy standing next to it was bigger than the tree. And I thought we were going to get a lineman, but no, that was the new coach, Coach Francis. And I'll tell you, the lessons I learned from the coach were stood by me for all my life, and I'm grateful for that. And he was very intuitive. He was a free thinker. He thought up all sorts of crazy things to do with a football. One of the first things he did, our team had a mediocre, in the middle of we had something like 3-3 or 3-2 or something like that. And then all of a sudden, the next team that was on our list was Wilbraham. And Wilbraham was #1 in our prep schools with 4-0. And Little Williston is going to go up against them. So this is what Rick did. He went and he got all the blocking dummies. Now, the blocking dummies were a canvas like a shmoo, looks like a shmoo, and they're about 5 feet tall. They're a blocking dummy. And he put names on the blocking dummy. And so when we met, these guys had like names I will never forget. Neil, I forgot it already. Neil Galloway, and the quarterback name was Whitehouse. Well, you can imagine what happened when the team, Wilbraham, comes out, and somebody says, "Hi, Neil, how are you? How you doing today?" We crushed them. And that was one of Rick's, the first one I ever saw of his. One of the other ones was when we were going to play St. Paul. Now, we had dropped Deerfield because they killed us. And so we're going to play St. Paul. So you drive all the way to Boston, and here we are. We possibly can have a winning season if we win, but we're losing by 6 points in the fourth quarter. And what are we going to do, Rick? And he says, well, we're going to have to punt on the from the 40-yard line. Why would you do that? Don't you think you should throw a pass in the end zone? No? I want to have a punt. Curtis, you're the punter. So I go back and I get ready to receive the ball, Bob. Bob Couch. He came the year I was here. So I'm getting ready to get the ball, to punt the ball. The ball comes back to me, and this is prearranged by Rick. And instead of punting it, we put the ball back like this. We had a halfback that could run with the wind. He took the ball out of my hands and ran 40 yards for a touchdown. And that that was just one of the things. I'm a dentist, and a lot of things that I learned about communication with people, how to talk, how to listen, came from teachers that we had. Rick was the best.
Not fair making me go up the steps without a handrail. I'm old. I'm getting older. I'm Daniel Gould. I came here a long time ago. I was not as long ago as some of you old guys, but I was here just when the younger guys were starting to get here that knew what football was oblong instead of like an old rugby ball. So we were getting a little more modern, and we had a coach that could throw the football from here to Hartford, Connecticut. Very briefly, I can't beat a story like that, so even if I were a comedian, I give up. But when I came here, I was a pretty homesick kid. I I've come back here numerous times. I've been gone for over 50 years, and I see a lot of people that I have something to do with. And I had something to do with Williston before I came. My father came here. He was the son of a bankrupt apple farmer. So you knew I had was all ready for, they were all ready for me to kick my tail when I got here too. So I just came and I was pretty lost for a while. I had an older brother. I have a nickname, Pup, that I've had for over 50, 60 years. I got it when I was here, and it wasn't because I was adorable. I have a great list of Puppy. What kind of a stupid name is that for a 75-year-old man? Well, I have a great personality, or I bark at the moon, or I'm funny. I was one homesick little dude, and in all seriousness, I was just lost, and I tagged along after my older brother, Zach, and until everybody called me Puppy, and it's lasted. I don't follow him around anymore. But there was a man that got my attention early on, and I was prompted to write this poem about him after I learned how to write. It's called The Measure of a Man. The measure of a man before I was a man was to watch the straightness of your throw, the length of the passage, the spin and spiral. How many times I saw that ball spin, sailing full field, by foot or by hand. Oh, to do that. Now I look back to see the angles you used to reach out around some unstrung soul, your twisting neck and moving smile, shaping some straight line to more than thousands. How lucky for me to know you as I have, giving it all, just the right spin.
Hi, I'm Jim Kane. I'm a recent graduate of Williston. Actually, class of 1968. I'd like to start by thanking Marilyn and her family for the privilege to be here today and to say a few words. I read the many comments that came in memoriam page, and it is amazing how many people had this deep respect for Rick and really would have relished the opportunity to be here and make comments today. So I can't thank you enough for this opportunity. Reading many of those tributes reminded me, and I'm sure all of you here today, how monumental the Williston experience was and remains to all of us. Coach Francis was at the center of so many important experiences in the classroom, on the basketball court or football field, and in keeping students like Richie Halpern, who will be speaking in a minute, on course to graduate on time while they boarded in the Francis home. In the summer of 1963, my mom told me that my brother Dan would be going to summer school at Williston. Dan was a great football player, but academics was not his strong suit at the time. We lived 15 minutes from the heart of the campus, but I had never heard of Williston, and I didn't even know what a prep school was. Little did I realize at the time how transformational my mom's decision would be for Dan and me. In the fall of 1963, Coach Francis assembled and led an extraordinary team that brought Williston its first undefeated season since 1896. When I arrived in the fall of 1964, I learned that the morale at the school was an all-time high that year due to the team's success on the gridiron. As Dan's year at Williston was reaching its conclusion, my mom somehow convinced Phil Stevens to accept Dan's younger brother, a chubby 14-year-old who loved football, but lacked the speed, drive, and toughness of his older brother. In spite of those shortcomings, Coach Francis added me as the only freshman to the varsity squad. I practiced with the varsity, but never did play a down that first season. Maybe Coach thought that having a cane on the roster would force opposing coaches to prepare for another dose of my brother. In hindsight, I believe he knew practicing with the older boys would toughen me up a little quicker, and he was right. Two quick stories that will forever remind me of the man we are here to honor today. I was not the hard worker that some of my teammates were. Coach realized that to get the most out of me, he would have to lean on me during practice throughout the season. I tended to enjoy the food at Williston more than the average student. So he worked me a little harder than everyone else. And in fact, in my senior year, he made me weigh in at the end of the week. Among his strategies to keep me in shape, he would have me run these long pass patterns to keep me in shape. He'd do this before and after practice. He'd stand in one end zone and send me out to catch a pass. After 30, 40, and 50 yards, I'd look back expecting him to throw the ball. He'd wave me to keep going another 10, 20, or 30 yards before throwing the ball over my head. After 4 or 5 of those long passes and gasping for air, he'd let me join my teammates in the locker room. But my most vivid and lasting memory, and Marilyn, I'm sorry you're going to hear this again, is how magically he ended my bout with homesickness. In spite of being only 15 minutes from my home in Holyoke, I was into my second year at Williston and still missing home and my mom's cooking. At dinner one night, I asked him if I could talk with him when we were dismissed from the dining room. I remember being so sad that day, and I started crying when we sat in his blue Ford station wagon with the fake wood paneling on the side behind Ford Hall. I don't remember what he said or what I said, but from that very moment, I was a new person and never felt homesick again. I think it was the first time it sunk in that someone so important at the school had my back and cared about me. Whatever he said or did worked. How does one measure the value of that encounter and the man who flipped the switch that changed my life? Marilyn, thanks again for the honor to be able to share these thoughts. You know better than anyone how special Rick was.
Thanks, Jim. My diploma's on display in the foyer. I'm Richard Halpern, class of 1968, graduate of Clark House, barely, also in 1968. That was as close to Animal House as the school has ever had. As the years go by, our names change. Now I'm Richard Halpern, Mr. Halpern, but I'm really Hal, Hatchet Hal, Richie Halpern, or as Rick Francis would say, Prince Hal. Now when I would come back for reunions and he would greet me with a big Prince Hal, somebody would say, you know, the guy's from Holyoke, he used to talk about Nick's Nest and hot dogs. How did he become a prince? When I arrived at Williston in the fall of 1964, as a 5'6", 118-pound, baby-faced student, I knew I wasn't going to play football. I ran cross country, but I always liked football, and I had heard that the coach could really throw the ball. I said, listen, I'm sure he can throw the ball, but can he throw it like Staubach or Sonny Jurgensen or the infamous Y.A. Tittle with the New York Giants? So I decided to walk by the field. He could throw it. He really could throw it. I said to myself, could I be a scat back or just return punts for this guy? Then I saw the hitting, and I said, I'll pass. I did play basketball for Rick, and he knew how to motivate. And I played some, I didn't play a lot, but one game stands out. We were playing Deerfield, and they were loaded, they were good. But I got in, and they had what I would say would be a power forward, about 6'3", 235, got an offensive rebound over me, put it back in for a basket. Rick took me out. And as I'm coming out, he says, "Way to box out, Hal." So I went back in, and I was under the boards again, and it's amazing what a stray elbow can do. I came back out, and Rick said, "Way to go." But in the handshake line, I wanted to be at the end with Rick behind me. Academically, it was a challenge. I had Rick in math, and I found daylight there. But I had a teacher named Chris Eustace for Spanish. I had my hands full. And Rick knew it, as did Al Shaler. Rick would see me studying, and I would go in after class to get some extra help. And I had a key exam, and Rick saw me after the exam. He said, "How did it go?" And I said, I wasn't sure if I was in German or Spanish. I then got transferred to Dave Thomas's class and became a solid Spanish student. Thanks to Rick, and I also believe Al Shaler was involved with that. I remember the Friday night rallies. I'm sure many of you do as well. And Rick would go up there. He had a certain swagger, and he had a certain way about him, and he would talk about, we're going to stop Kiarsis from Suffield, and the left-handed quarterback from Loomis has got no chance. And we used to, as upper middlers, I say the name, my father used to say to me, "What exactly are you? Are you a sophomore? Are you a junior? Or are you a lower middler, a lower bottomer? What are you?" And I said, "Well, I'm an upper middler." And we used to have hot dogs that we'd give out, and I'd always listen to Rick, and he would motivate us, and we would feel like it was the best thing that was going on that Friday night. And I would tell my dad, "Yeah, we had a rally, and what'd you do at the rally?" "I gave out hot dogs." He said, "Well, you shouldn't be at Williston giving out hot dogs." The bond that you establish here at Williston between the teachers, the coaches, the guys we grew up with, it's a special bond. I'm godfather to some of my classmates' sons and daughters, and it's something that you can't put in words, but will always be part of you and as meaningful a part of your life as you'll ever have. Rick and Marilyn, when we were in Clark House, it was quite a crew, and the memories are strong. And my biggest problem was I had a roommate that studied too much, and which cut into my listening to ball games on those little transistor radios that we all used to have. I'm going to miss coming back to reunions and not hearing that voice, Prince Hal. And I always knew who it was, and there was always a certain meaning, and it was something that Rick and I both felt very good about, and it's something that I'll never forget. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Mike Tim, and I was also in the class of 1968. And I do remember Clark House, although I never lived there, and I'm probably just as glad that didn't happen to me. I've got two stories that I thought I would not tell, a football or basketball story, since so many of you have such great ones. Instead, I'm going to tell you two things that I remember most fondly about Rick. The first is that I think, like Jim Kane, my family did not know anything about what a boarding school was. I grew up in Illinois, and I don't think I was ever east of Indiana until I came here. And one of the other people in Springfield had a son who had gone to Andover, but who had applied to Williston because it was such a great swimming school in those days. And he went to Andover and then on to West Point. And my father knew him, and he suggested to my father that if we didn't like the public schools in Springfield, perhaps we ought to think about sending me to boarding school. And I didn't. I took the tests. I applied to exactly the same 5 schools this guy did, and I got into Andover and Williston. And my father looked at me, and he also didn't have a clue about boarding schools. And he said, okay, he said, that's great, I'm glad you got in. He said, I'll drive you out there. We'll spend half a day at each school, and then you can decide which one you're going to, but you're going. And being the compliant oldest son of 4, I said, okay. So we came and went to Andover first, and we spent about a half a day there, and the only person I met was the assistant to the assistant director of admissions, who had to sit and look at my file on his desk while he talked to my dad and to me. And that was it. So then the next day we came to Williston, and Bob St. George, who at the time was the director of admissions, met us, and we spent 15 or 20 minutes with him. And he took me in to see Phil Stevens, the headmaster. And the headmaster spent 15 or 20 minutes with us. And then there was a knock at the headmaster's door, and it was Rick Francis. Now, I wasn't much bigger than Rich Halpern when I started in 10th grade here. I probably weighed all of 140 pounds soaking wet. So I'm fairly certain that when Rick looked at my biography information before he came into that room, he wasn't thinking to himself, here's the next Dan Kane. So he came in, and instead he spent 15 or 20 minutes talking to me, and he asked me about my football program out in Illinois, and my coach happened to be my dad, and he wanted to know how that was going. And he then talked about his football program and then what basketball was like at Williston. And then he left, and coincidentally, then Dan Carpenter was on the door right after Rick and had the same similar conversation about baseball. But then we got our tour, and we got back in the car to drive back to Illinois, and my dad said, okay, he said, what do you think? Which of these 2 do you want to go to? And I looked at him, and I said, I'm coming here. They already know who I am. The guy in Andover had to look through the file to even figure out who I was. And that one 15-minute meeting with Rick Francis transformed our whole family, because all 3 of my brothers came to Williston after I did. And there was one of us here for 11 straight years. And if I hadn't chosen Williston, who knows where we would have been. I know my brother Gil, for example, would never have met his wife, who also went to Williston. So that 15 minutes that he gave me made that kind of difference. Now let's fast forward 3 years to our senior year. Spring of our senior year, probably only a month or month and a half before we graduated, and Jim Kane and I decided that we wanted, or actually Jim decided we wanted to go visit his mom in Holyoke. Now he's already talked about how important that was in his life. So after Saturday evening dinner, when a lot of other guys were going to the movie or doing something else, we decided we'd go to Holyoke, but we didn't have any way to get there. So we decided we'd hitchhike. Now, in 1968, hitchhiking was, if you're a Williston student, was not something you were supposed to do. So we were out at the edge of town, standing on the side of the street with our thumbs out looking for a ride. And coming the other way is Rick Francis. Now, he's going this way, and we're trying to get a ride going this way. And he goes by, and it probably was in that same Ford station wagon, I can't remember. But Jim and I looked at each other and said, oh, shit. Did you think he saw us? Well, we didn't have to wait long because that car turned around and he pulls up next to us and he says, get in. So we climb in the car and he says, what are you doing? And he knew what we were doing. We were trying to hitch a ride someplace. And we explained that we wanted to go over and see Jim's mom and that afterwards we were probably going to go to Friendly's for a milkshake and then we come home or something like that. And he goes, he just sighed, put the car on drive, and drove over the mountain. Now Jim and I are in the back seat going, what? Where? And we never said a word. We get into Holyoke. He pulls over to the side of the road and he says, go ahead, get out. I said, what? He said, yeah, get out. He said, just be back by check-in. And we got out, we went to see Jim's mom, and then we kind of horsed around in Holyoke, and we did just about make it on time to get back for check-in. But in hindsight, I think about that as the bookend to when Rick welcomed me to Williston 3 years before. And I think he was kind of letting me go 3 years later. And in between, I had the experiences that all of you had as a teacher, a coach, a mentor, and eventually a friend. But he always did it in that very personal way. Now, I'd stop here, but unlike some of the other people here, I got just one more. The spring of my freshman year in college, I call Rick and I say, Rick, do you need any counselors at camp? And he said, well, I'll call you back in just a day or so. And he was, as Rachel said, the program director at Cape Cod Sea Camps. He called me back and said, yes, we could use you as a counselor. You have to teach tennis. I remember checking this on the box. Tennis and coach baseball. And it was a good thing that he said okay, because I met a girl there. And she turned out to be my wife for 50 years. And what that whole summer that we would go to Rick and Marilyn's house because there were two other guys from my class that he also hired as camp counselors. We would go to Rick and Marilyn's house, I'd say about every 6 days. And Marilyn would always fix us Western omelet sandwiches on white bread. And every once in a while, Rick would slip us a beer. Even though we were 19 or 20, as we watched the Red Sox games. But after that, the Williston experience, the Cape Cod experience, Rick and Marilyn were at our wedding. Rick and Marilyn gave us their house on Cape Cod for our honeymoon. And we started a family tradition of visiting Brewster, Massachusetts, most summers with our children, and always tried to visit with Rick and Marilyn when we were there. I will end by saying that in addition to Rick, there was one other almost as equally famous person passed away this year that I'm sure that it's probably the first person you might have thought of when you heard the news of Rick's passing. Jimmy Buffett. Very much the same kind of person. No, maybe not. I'm fairly certain that Rick was not, he might not have known who Jimmy Buffett is. He certainly was not a parrot head. as some of Jimmy Buffett's most ardent fans were called. But there were some lyrics in a song that was not Margaritaville that reminded me of Rick, and I thought I'd finish by reading those. It goes like this. Through 88 years of perpetual motion, because he's Rick, he'll smile and he'll say, Mike, a little of it was tragic, but most of it was magic, and I had a good life all the way.
Am I going out of order? No, you're not at all. What was it?
Go ahead. Peter, you'll go after. Gil's going after him.
Did I mess up? Customary. Wow. I did jump the line. I'm going between two Tims. I am not Gil Tim, but I want to tee him up a little bit. For those of us who played football, we had a magnificent coach. In the history of Williston athletics, no one can match Rick Francis for his 42 years. I always felt Mr. Francis was on loan to us through the generosity of his family, Marilyn, Mrs. Francis, and his two sons, Jeff and Todd. That loan had no interest due. For many of us, the dividends extended to an enduring relationship through typewritten holiday greetings and his patented signature, Rick and Marilyn. Marilyn and the boys know this, but every Sunday morning, the first thing Rick would do was to get into his car and drive to South Hadley and pick up the film from Frantech of Saturday's game that Couchy took from the tower. He spent most of Sunday breaking down that film for us. Thank you for sharing Rick. As players, we have our 1, 2, 3, or 4 years as personal treasures. Memories endure in our dreams and the greatness we achieved on the gridiron, a greatness that grows in outsized proportion over time. But for this remembrance, let us travel back 54 years to the fall of 1969, when a new sophomore, Laura Midler then, walked into Boardman Auditorium ahead of Labor Day for a week of early football practice. Behold, there was Mr. Francis, a big man on a grand scale. He possessed a commanding presence, accompanied by an affable and kindly smile. He shook hands with new players as if he knew and was expecting us. I had never met him. He spoke jokingly, with familiarity and ease to returning players. I sure hoped I would be one of them someday. It was a little intimidating. What followed was 3-a-day practices for a week. Mornings in fresh pants, pads, and jerseys. Afternoons in the same pants, pads, and jerseys, soaked with sweat and smelling of ammonia. Evening meetings in the auditorium. Film, X's and O's, blocking schemes, passing routes. This coach was into it. On the field, few people towered above Mr. Francis. Maybe Tree Newton at 6'6", but no one else on that 1969 team. Here was this athletic man with size who knows what black-ribbed soled coaching shoes and a pack of Salem cigarettes rolled into his left sock. It was his left sock, so he could punt or place kick with that right foot. More about that. Each morning and afternoon and evening, this man with a detailed plan and plenty to teach kept it fun and interesting. Then came the first day of Find the Ball, a hitting drill that was devoid of finesse. Just fend off blocks and make a tackle. New guys, old guys, big guys, small guys, Coach Francis exhorting us to stick our nose in there. Okay. After that practice, a little beaten but not broken, untying my cleats on the front step of the gym, Coach Francis walked past, patted me on the head, and said, "Nice job, Tiger. We just might find a spot for you. Guard, maybe, and he walked. My heart sank. I was a running back, 5'8" and 150 pounds. The next day, the depth chart was posted. My name, the 5th one down among guards, not in alphabetical order. But Coach Francis did not forget or ignore me. By the first game, I was a runner, taking in plays he wanted passed along to the quarterback, Gary Tim. See, Coach Francis did not call all the plays. He taught the plays and let his quarterback run the game. More on that too. By the second game, both guards got hurt. This runner became a starter, not because of any measurable ability, but because Coach Francis found a spot and coached him up along with Carpi and Vinny Labello. We went 6-1 that season, losing only to Hotchkiss. Fast forward to our senior year, 1971, and I returned to the backfield. But now it was our team, and things were changing at Williston. Coeducation. Nils Berg had hair draped out of his helmet and down his shoulders, but he could hit and play. Coach Francis had worked all summer long to put in an offense for the best passer in Williston history, Gil Tim. Rick used to boast that Gil's statistical performance in 1971 was greater in 8 games than Jim Plunkett of the New England Patriots achieved in 14, and it was true. We were winners. And we believed every week that we were the best prepared and best coached team on the planet. I return now to Coach Francis's physical prowess. He still coached with those Salems in the left sock. He quit later in life. He prepared us not just with film, blocking schemes, but with his own considerable athletic ability. When we practiced punts, the kicks thundered off that huge right foot higher and deeper than any prep school kid could ever kick them. The same for kickoff returns, where he would boot the ball down to the 5 or the goal line. Our coach could do it all. Most impressive was Coach Francis's ability to throw a football. When we practiced pass defense, Coach Francis often quarterbacked the hamburger offense, as he called it. He challenged our defensive backs with hard, precisely thrown passes to receivers who mirrored the routes he knew the weak opponents would use. When one of our D-backs intercepted a practice pass, it was likely because Rick disguised the errant pass just enough to give the defense confidence. 71 was legendary. There are 3 speakers here from that team. And as mentioned, Gil Tim, in Gil, he designed an offense that was in line with his own passion, throwing the football. Gil could throw it as far as Coach Francis was over 60 yards. That was a standard. Preparation remained Coach Francis's brand and our belief. No memorable pep talks, just this big man in a shirt and tie and sometimes a hat, walking into the wrestling room before a home game to send us out to the field. Adjustments, reminders, readiness. There was 1 week of particularly intense preparation. Foul weather drove us inside one day where we did walk through and talk through in the gym. At the end of practice, Coach Francis, the adult in the room, explained exactly how he had a winning plan. He summed things up. We're going to show them a little of this. We're going to run a lot of that. And we're going to give them a lot of this. Threw that fake punch and ripped his pants, so to speak. We exploded in laughter. We were loose. We were ready. We won again. Pride, sacrifice, and respect. When one of us would visit Mr. Francis in his office, there were 2 things that captured our attention. First, there was a picture of an attractive woman on his desk with a collie. That was Coach Francis's wife, Marilyn. She was front and center in his life, always. Secondly, there was a picture on the wall of Newt Rockne addressing the Notre Dame football team in the locker room with the following words: "Make your opponents fear and respect you." Pride, sacrifice. Rick made every moment on the field feel like it was the most important moment of our lives, not in winning at all costs, but in the joy of playing football. There's one more story worth sharing. We faced an undefeated Wilbraham opponent in November at the end of the 71 season. They were good and loaded. The following is true. Wilbraham led 22-20 with exactly 7 minutes remaining. Coach Francis had put in a crazy play called the virus, which we ran earlier in the game and resulted in an interception. Gil Tim had us driving, and we were at the opponent's 25-yard line, trailing by those 2 points. Coach summoned the virus. Again? No. Oh. We ran it, we scored, and took the lead. In the next 7 minutes, we turned a 22-20 deficit into a 56-30 victory. But that's not all. We scored off a turnover to make it 48-30 with around a minute left. Coach sent in the extra point team. As I said, Rick did not call all the plays. 49 points. In the huddle, we decided Gil should use a fake field goal and look for 130-pound Ted Dane in the end zone for 2 points. Maybe it was Tom Davis who suggested, let's make it an even 50. We stuck that dagger into their hearts and giddily ran off the field toward our bench, where we confronted a confused and rather stern scowl from Coach Francis. What are you doing? We were supposed to kick it. But Coach, it was an even 50 and we wanted Ted Dane to score. Rick just smiled, shook his head, that was it. He wouldn't have done it, but he loved it. In closing, here's my final greeting to Mr. Francis. Dear Coach Francis, thank you for leaving a legacy worthy of the highest ideals of coaching and teaching. Thank you for letting us be ourselves and to live our dreams. It's for us to pass the torch to our children, grandchildren, those we teach, those we coach, those we work with, and those we love. You are a hero, a mentor, and a coach worthy beyond measure in so many hearts where you continue to live forever. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Peter Wold. I live in Casper, Wyoming, which is a long ways away from here. And part of the reason I was late, I'm sorry about that. I'm in class of 67. And when I heard that we were going to have this celebration of life, I knew that I had to be here. I had to be here because the gentleman that we are acknowledging made an indelible impression on my life. When I was preparing my comments for this afternoon, I asked my wife, Marla, what she thought that I ought to say. And she said, keep it short. Don't try to be funny. Don't try to be clever. Don't try to be witty. Don't try to be intellectual. Just be yourself. Oh, okay, dear. Thank you. I loved Mr. Francis. He was a friend. He was a mentor. He was my teacher. And of course, he was my coach. He was all these things wrapped into one incredible individual. As a friend, Coach Francis was one of the first faculty members that I met as a sophomore new boy, having never set foot on this campus. I had the good fortune of being assigned to Coach Francis's dining room table the first week of school. The day that I was designated as the waiter, I had a problem with a cocky senior at the table who wanted more roast beef. Well, the kitchen was out of roast beef, so he started flipping peas at me. Well, the coach saw what was going on and stopped it, and from that day on, we were buddies. As a mentor and a teacher, there was no one on the campus that I had more respect or esteem for. He was an imposing figure as he strided across the campus, always had a gleeful smile and an uplifting welcome. "Good morning, Woldy," he replied. In his class, I was usually hoping to not hear my name, but when it was called, he frequently got a blank, unintelligible stare back. He was always available for after-class tutoring, and that wasn't an infrequent situation in my case. There were some very special times when Coach and Mrs. Francis invited me over for dinner. As a always hungry kid, a dinner over at the coach's house was really special. And Mrs. Francis was a great cook. Something besides mystery meat and Alphonse's cooking was A-okay with me. Speaking of the coach, he was without doubt the greatest coach that I ever played for. He really knew the game of football and the strategies to usually win. My senior year, we went 5-2 and probably were playing over our talent level. We had no real stars, other than Jimmy Kane, of course. But Coach Francis designed plays around our strengths, and we had a great season. Well, I wish Coach Francis was here with us today to hear these stories. However, I suspect that he's upstairs chuckling. He was a wonderful friend, a mentor, a teacher, and a coach, and I miss him. I can't close without saying what a great treat it is for Marla and me to see Todd Francis here today. Back when Todd was in high school, he came to our hole-in-the-wall ranch to work for the summer. And I think that Todd probably thought that he was going to be riding horses up in the Bighorn Mountains, chasing Black Angus cattle, and eating ribeye steaks in the evening around a campfire. Well, that summer we were building a set of corrals at the headquarters in the valley. And the work was hot, and it was dusty. And all Todd had was a shovel, a post hole digger, and a tampon bar. But you know, I'm really proud of Todd because Todd still holds the ranch record for digging the most post holes in the shortest period of time. And you know, Todd, we'd love to have you come back to the hole in the wall. And I promise you wouldn't have to dig any post holes, unless, of course, you want to try to break your record. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Steve. That was wonderful. You made me want to suit up, start all over again. Said a lot of nice things. I want you to forget about that. I want to go back to when I first started at Williston. I had two brothers who came before me. There were 4 of us who went over that period of 11 years. For 3 years, I heard about Williston, never saw the school. Never went to a parents' day, never went to a game, nothing. I saw some photographs and I heard names. So the names became these legends. Rick Francis was one of them. And so when I got to Williston, you would think, I had one of my older brothers, not Mike, but Gary was with me, that he would shuffle me through and help me through. Well, we came for early football practice. I was the only freshman. I came on the coattails of my brother. I don't really remember that first evening, like you talked about, where we had film, but I remember how anxious I was. I felt very alone. I lived in Clare House, which was a small little house off campus. There was nobody there, just me. So after that first meeting, I walked back in the dark. Looking at this house was totally dark. I felt totally alone, just me. So the next day, I arrived for breakfast again. My brother, you think, hey, come on, sit with me. No, he just shaved off. He was with all his buddies. And the thing I noticed was at breakfast, these were all varsity athletes, all of them shaved. They were big men, 4 or 5 years older than I was. So we got our pads, and we went to our first practice. And this wasn't anything like I thought it would be, this experience. Rick called together a drill, and Steve referred to it. I called it the hamburger drill. And what he did is he lines up part of the team in one line, we'll say here, and then part of the team in this line. And he just said, everybody on this side go there, everybody on this side go there, and I went to this side. I didn't know what was going on, so I'm standing in line, and he says, this line, my line, you are going to fend off 3 people and then tackle the person with the ball. So I was pretty far to the back of the line, and so they started, and it was brutal. So after the first guy went through, I think it was 3, and then the guy with the ball, I started counting, looking at that other line going, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, until I found who I was going to be against. Some of you may know the name Tim Crow. Tim Crow was the middle linebacker for Williston at that time. And he was a legend to me because he was a beast. He was someone who opened doors with his head. This is the name, and now I saw the face. He was standing there. Behind him was Teddy Benoit, the captain, senior, little guy. Sam Greeley was after him, another captain, just an absolute beast. And standing there with the ball, waiting for me, I'm counting, John Hellebush, big guy, 6'2", 3'4", offensive end. So I'm just kind of meekly looking for an exit strategy. We're going, and then we meet. And all I remember is seeing Tim Crow's face. He had one of those face masks that covered his whole face. I had one of those little things that go like this. And his nose was split open and bleeding. I was terrified. He came at me like a flash of light, and he stuck his face right in my face, right in my helmet, and lifted me off of the ground. I thought I came out of my shoes. I mean, I was just, I felt like my helmet spit. I was on my back, I don't know how long. I opened my eyes, and there, standing over me, was Rick Francis. Now, he had a choice at this point, how to handle this situation. So he reached down, and I don't even know, I may have been knocked out. But I looked up, he reached down, I grabbed his hand, and he pulled me up. Again, I wasn't sure what was going to happen next. He was going to humiliate me in front of this group. They were already kind of, whoa, that was something. Spun his head around, look, his helmet, he didn't have any shoes. But he pulled me aside, away from the team, and he said, "You're one of my quarterbacks. You don't get in these drills." But what he really meant was, I just saved your life. Now that reaching down is a symbol to me of my relationship with Rick Francis. Every day, he was the person I saw the most on this campus. I had him for football, I had him for basketball, never had him as a teacher. But every day, whether he was coaching or in the off season when I played baseball, I walked by his desk in the gymnasium. And he always yelled out, And more times than not, I would step in and sit down, and we would just check each other out. We became friends, good friends. Now, push forward to my senior year. Our school had gone through a tremendous change. At the time my brother Mike left, boys wore coat and ties, we waited on tables, we went to chapel every day. In fact, my first job as a freshman was cleaning these pews, just a little aside. They look very nice. In my senior year, everything had changed. We were a co-ed school for the first time. There was no dress code. You didn't have to wear socks. You didn't have to wear a tie. There was no dining hall like we knew it before. You didn't wait on tables. They had a cafeteria instead. And when I came back for early football my senior year, I was a totally different person, transformed from when I was as a freshman. I didn't know everything, but I knew almost everything I could possibly learn, I had learned at Williston at that time. And I remember making it a point of all the new kids that came to do what Rick Francis did. Reach down, reach out, make sure that they felt welcome so that they weren't alone. And to show you where that relationship went and what that friendship meant, I have one more story. In our senior year, Rick Francis put an offense in. He called it the run and gun. That means that we had wide receivers and Steve August was the only person in the backfield. It was run and gun, it was run and gun, and I was the sharpshooter. One game, it was late in our season, and we had we're going in for a winning season. We were moving the ball down the field, and by that I mean it was just down and out pass, down and out pass, down and out pass, down and out pass. The ball was marching, and we were getting ready to score. And then the referee goes, timeout. I said, timeout? I didn't call timeout. And I'm looking over at the sidelines, and Rick's standing there going, timeout. I'm going, no, Rick, we're all right. So I went over. I said, what? Maybe not quite like that. I was thinking what, but I said, yes. What is it? And he said, I want to put in a play. Now, our senior year, Rick never sent plays in. He just let me call plays. That was pretty nice. Well, he called me over, and just when I thought we were in our rhythm, in our groove, and wanted to call this play. So I said, all right, what is it that you want? He said, I want this play. I want you to fake like you're giving the ball to Steve August off of the guard. Don't tell him it's a fake. Don't tell anybody it's a fake. Just run the play so they all do their assignments. And when he gets the ball, pull it away from him. And turn this way and take 2 steps, and you can get on a bus and you can walk into that end zone. I said, really? And then he just came close to me, and I backed up. He put his hands on my shoulder pads, and he said, you know, you may be the gunslinger, but I'm the sheriff. Now, see, he didn't really say that. He wouldn't have said that. What he really said was, you know, that's all nice, but I am the coach. And he was the coach. So I went back in, big secret, not telling anybody. Hey, what'd he say? What'd he say? Oh, he wants us to run Steve off guard, blah, blah, blah. We'll do that. And so I did that play. I just faked it, went, and it was like, oh, the whole field just opened up. I could have just stepped into it. I just walked into the end zone like. I didn't score touchdowns. The only time I ran was when things went sideways. And then I was running to the side to get off the field. So that was a gift from Rick. But really what it taught me is that friend who reached down and put out his hand also takes the time, gives you the time, first of all, to make your own decisions. But then when he sees something that could help you out, go on, offers that suggestion, and he did. And that's what really Rick did my whole time here. And he did that for all 4 brothers. So to us and our family, Rick was more than a coach or teacher, he was that friend. And I want to thank the Francis family on behalf of my entire family for sharing your lives with us. Thank you.
All right, hello everyone. My name's Lou Arp. I'm from the class of 73, and I was just here a few months ago for my 50th alumni, and anyway, it was a super time. I want to thank the school for organizing such a wonderful reunion, and also for this today. This is fantastic, and also to the family for giving me this special opportunity to share a little bit of my insights as to how Coach Francis impacted mine and your lives. So. Anyway, I think you'll find my remarks have some common threads, but also some new insights, perhaps, that haven't been shared today. So, my special experience with Coach Francis began, as others did, coming to early football practice. It was 53 years ago, and I was put on an airplane in Illinois, and I arrived as a 16-year-old at Hartford. It was a, late August, early September day. It was raining, it was dark, it was cold. I walked down the steps of the airplane, crossed the runway over to the gate. All I had was a trunk of clothes that my mother had packed and a radio that my grandfather gave me. I walked up to the terminal, and there he was, with a big smile on his face. It was Rick Francis. He greeted me, told me that he was happy to see me. He made me feel at ease. Took me over to Williston Cottage, and then went to dinner, and instead of Gil coming back and not having any lights on, after I got back to Williston Cottage an hour or two later, I got visited by Gil Tim and Dale McKell just to see how I was doing. So the coach was there for me when I needed him. And I found that to be the case throughout my schooling at Williston. In fact, on some notable occasions, he was there for me when I didn't even know I needed him. He was that kind of a person. So we've heard some great stories today about him as a coach and as a teacher. But there's another side of Coach Francis that I wanted to share, and had to do with my parents. So that fall, my parents come from Illinois, and it's Parents' Weekend, and I can't remember where we were, but it was a gathering, and the coach came up to me and my parents and introduced himself, and we had some small talk, and he said to my mom and dad, I just want you to know how I appreciate your son Louis here being on this football team, and how he's already contributing, and there's some other boys from Illinois that I've had some luck with as well. So he said to my dad, he said, do you know the Tim family from Springfield, Illinois? It's like 500 miles away or something. And he said, no. I says, well, tell you what, if you see any other boys from Illinois that want to come to Williston, you just send them my way, will you? So over the next several years, every time I was home, whether it was vacation or the summer, I think my dad told that story 2 or 3 dozen times to about everyone he knew. The point being, the coach made a special connection with my parents and made them feel like they were valued and that their son was special. Now, that to me made my parents feel like the coach could do no wrong and Williston could do no wrong. So not only was he was the coach, but he was an ambassador of the school. And those special experiences are something that I think many of us experience on the field, in the classroom, and elsewhere. In my career in business and my life, I've met a number of people that have this special ability to connect with people in a positive and meaningful way. Coach Francis was one of these people. I think there's several things that I find in common that I've seen in the people that I've met that have this special ability. And a few things come to mind. Number one, you got to be good at what you do. You have to have job mastery. You got to be a winner. I think we can all agree here, after the stories we've heard today, Coach Francis was a winner. The second thing has to do with a passion for what you do. I think we've heard several examples of those. The one that comes to my mind, and here again, I think we've had some talk about the football team and some of the meetings, but we played our games on Saturday, and then on Sunday morning, we had the debrief in the Dodge Room. And as Augie mentioned, we had this film. It was, the old Super 8 with the projector. Well, the team was in the Dodge Room after breakfast every Saturday morning after the games. And we watched the films, right? And we kind of debriefed the game. Well, Coach Francis had this thing in his hand. It was the forward-reverse thing, okay? And he would hit that thing. If you had a good play, you'd see it 10 or 15 times. But if you had a bad play, you'd also see that 10 or 15 times. It would go forward and reverse, forward and reverse. And for me, it was one of those games where Gil was the quarterback, and I had caught a couple touchdowns. I think it was against Loomis. And in the second half, I was wide open on a play. And Gil threw the ball way up high, and I was wide open, and I dropped it. And in the Dodge Room, I saw that thing about a dozen times, okay? So why did he do that? He didn't do that to humiliate me, to embarrass me. There was a lesson. And he said, Arpie, and this was to the other receivers there as well. Most of the time when the quarterback throws it to you, you catch the ball like this, right? Well, if it's over your head and it's high, your little fingers are together, not your thumbs. And that extends your reach just a few inches. And so he says, if your fingers were together there instead of your thumbs, you would have had a third touchdown. So the point being, that's what I call passion. He basically took every opportunity, whether it was something that was a good development or something that was not a good development, and he used those to teach us about what's important, and that's what I call passion. All right, so I said you got to be good at what you do. These people have passion for what they do. I'd say the third thing that I've observed is this thing, I call it sustainability. Some people can really have that big impact when they want to or when they need to. But some people have it, it's part of themselves. It's like that day where my parents met the coach at Parents' Weekend. He didn't try to turn it on, then he didn't try to intentionally make a big impact. It was just Rick being Rick. And he made a big impact on my parents, and he did that throughout his career, and it's something that I experienced many, many times, and I'm sure many of you did as well. So once again, thank you very much for letting me come up here and share my little stories about my experiences with Coach Francis, and I really have enjoyed all the other stories as well. And to the family, God bless you, and I wish you the best. Okay? Thank you.
All right, this should be easy to follow all that, right? So first, her name's been brought up a lot, but I got to thank Mom. What she's done. I got to spend 7 weeks with her this summer after Dad's death. It was a very good test. A 58-year-old man should not spend 7 weeks with his mother. But we made up. I had to come back a couple weeks later. On the back of your brochure, there's a picture of the three coaches: Coach Labello, Coach Carpenter, Coach Francis. The three wives, unfortunately one is no longer with us, are wearing yellow chrysanthemums just as this, It was a tradition Mom started after football games. They'd all get together. It was a way of her bringing herself into the community, which was really Dad's community. This was football, right? And there's a little bit I got to talk about up here about how that came into their lives, or Mom was introduced to it. But about Dad. So Jeff and I are lucky enough, we get to call her Dad. Mom got to call her husband. I'm sure she had some other choice names for him at times. My kids got to call him Granddad. Jeff's grandkids get to call him Great-Granddad. But I think everybody here understands he was coach. And that means so much to people. I'll give you an example. Where's Vinny Lobello? He's here somewhere, I swear. About 10, 12 years ago, I was driving from Portland, Maine back to Massachusetts. Dead stop traffic on 95. So I got onto Route 1. And, you know, we have stories about the Lobellos and the Carpenters and all the faculty here that I'll get to later as quickly as I can. But as I'm driving down through parts of Maine, I see a sign. It says Vincent's 2. And I remember they used to own Vincent's Restaurant. Empty parking lot, crappy weather. I pull in. It's not summer. Pull the number off the line, call. Someone answers the phone. Says, Vincent's, can I help you? I said, I'm looking for Vinny Lobello. He goes, who's this? And I said, it's Todd Francis. I had not seen him. He had done some work in the town in Newburyport where I was living, but we had spoken on the phone. I probably hadn't seen him in 20 years. And I said, it's Todd Francis. And I'm waiting for him to say, I'll get him. And just out of his mouth comes, Coach! And that meant something to me. That I have been doing that for 25 years now. I had probably been doing it for 10 or 15 at that point, and he knew it. And that was the name. So when I hear Coach, it's just it means a lot. I could go through tons of stories and add on to things that were said here. I'm going to try to keep it a little shorter than that, but this Williston community that Dad decided to spend his life in means so much to us. Meant so much to Mom, Jeff, and I. I was thinking about it last night. I came up with a couple of, if you try to go through the names of all the people, you're gonna forget some, but I'll just name some families. Francis, Carpenter, Shaler, Couch, St. George, Brown, Cody, Baker, Archibald, Mosier. Just in those first 6 or 7 names, there's close to 300 years of service here at Williston. Dad being 42, I mean, nobody there is under 30 years. And that's how we live. Clark House was, I heard, a zoo. I was 3 years old, so I don't know. But just what Williston meant to Dad and Dad gave back to Williston is unbelievable. And it's impressive. You've heard about it here. I don't know that you're going to find, it's starting to come back. One of the stories Mom told me about 4 Brewster Avenue was the Shalers lived upstairs, we lived downstairs, and she had made a pen in the backyard for Jeff and I. It was a fenced-in area. And I think Jimmy might have come in and played with us, but I don't think George liked it that much, so it was kind of Mom's, it's one of those things. And when I dropped her off out back here, Mom looked and said, wow, this is amazing. If we had this, I wouldn't have had to put you in a pen. So, but and it all comes around. I did my first lacrosse camp here this summer, and I stayed in the new dorms. I stayed in Wold House. Peter was generous enough to donate money and help us do this. I spent a summer with him. It wasn't the hole in the wall ranch at the time. It was the Bar C Ranch. I was barely 17 years old. Dan Nicoli, my classmate, we fly to Casper, Wyoming, end up at this huge high rise in the center of Casper, probably up, I don't know what floor your office was on, 20, 30, whatever. And all we knew is we were going to KC, Wyoming. So he handed us some keys to a car, and he pointed and he said, see the highway? You're going to go about 200 miles. Is that about how far north it is? You go about 200 miles, you're going to see an exit for KC. Just get off and go left. I swear to God, and he says it's about 20 miles down the road. Well, you didn't tell you that KC, Wyoming had 350 or 300, literally 360 people in the town or something like that. But we did. I spent 2 months out there. It was one of the best times of my life. And he didn't hear, but he offered me back, so I'm going. I'm going to go see it again. And then Steve August, when I graduated from college, he was my first general manager and drafted me. For the first time I got drafted, it was Steve that drafted me. So Williston brings us all. Thank you. I'm going to read from we got tons of letters, and I can't read them all. We just never get through them. But I'm going to start with just a couple excerpts from Dave DeLuca, class of 1960, Dad's first quarterback, who remained friendly with him much as these other did, but Dave has passed away. He ended up with a son that came here also, but this is from what Dave wrote to Rick in 2021, so not too far ago. Discovering Couchy's sideline fedora photo of you and Carpy unleashed a flood of fond memories from yours and mine, first year at Williston in 1958 to JD's graduation in 1995. You were the constant force in most of them. You coined the nickname Duke and JD, and they stuck. Whatever differences of opinion we had, as you wrote in my 1960 log, they were all resolved by the time JD graduated. Many thanks for the faith you showed in both of us during our time at Williston. We will skip through that and get to it. You and I survived successive spring behavioral incidents that launched me to Brown in 1960. I didn't know that you could become a delinquent and end up at Brown, but that seems to be what he's saying. He said, thank you. And then along came James, whose mother announced that his ADHD's temperament was not suited to playing quarterback. While tabbing him one of the best on the field football minds you have ever coached, you did warn us that he should only play sports requiring a helmet, thereby making it harder for officials to hear his opinions. But in the penultimate blessing was the job you and Matt Sawyer did shepherding him into admissions at Amherst. You even wrote a check for his $50 application fee. The first I learned of that process was congratulatory call from Joel Lamb, an Amherst football assistant. Coach, the impact you had on the DeLuca family is incalculable, and you always drove the bus. So that was from Dave DeLuca. Jay Grant, who in his letter here, he spent 21 years as his assistant. Half Rick's career was with Jay by his side. I came to Williston in 1978 as the school's first athletic trainer. I was straight out of grad school and new to the prep school world. I couldn't have asked for a better situation than to be able to work with Rick Francis for the next 21 years, half of his 42-year tenure at the school. Rick was a wonderful mentor to me for all those years. During that time, I always felt that I was working with Rick and not for him. We were a team always working together. My favorite part of the job was always game day and being on the sidelines with the teams. Rick was great to work with. He let me do my thing and never questioned a decision about whether a player had been injured, should play or not. He led the athletic department by example and made it easy for a young athletic trainer to do his job. In the 80s, Rick provided the direction for the athletic department to grow into the solid department it is today. From hunting and pecking on his typewriter to doing it all on a computer, from the old gym to the athletic center, Rick worked hard to advocate for improved facilities, and I'm glad that he was there to enjoy the new athletic center and other improvements the department has seen over the last 20 years. He was a driving force in the New England Prep School Athletic Council for many years. His leadership is still paying dividends today at Williston and in the larger group of New England prep schools. Rick was more than just a colleague that I worked well with. For 20 years, we spent tons of time together, in the gym, on the sidelines, in the rain and cold, and often muddy Sawyer Field. And on the way to games, school buses, he driving and me making sure that he stayed awake. And of course, playing the weekly football field. Rick was a good friend, and I miss him. And the last little bit is from his brother. Rick and Frosty had an incredible relationship. Even though they were an hour apart here, their houses on Cape Cod were probably, Dad would probably call it a touchdown and an extra point apart from each other. At his 30th reception here at school, Frosty wrote a few events in Rick's life of which some may be unaware. There's a point and a moral. There's a date. So we're talking 11/24/1934. Our dad ran into our house at 10:30 a.m. I'm off to the Yale-Harvard football game. Oh, and yes, you have a new brother. When born into an athletic tradition, game first, family second. April of 1940. Pediatricians report, Ricky has so many allergies he should seldom go outdoors and he must follow a very strict diet. Moral, always seek a second opinion. May of 1941, Ricky photographed carrying the cross, leading a sidewalk procession of two next-door twin girls, both of the Jewish faith. Moral, teach both leadership and interfaith values at the age of 5.5. March of 1948, accepted with financial aid as a third former at Choate. Moral, seeking secondary scholarship grant for second son based on outstanding preceding career of first son. 4 of 52, accepted without financial aid at Wesleyan. Do not seek college scholarship grant for second son if academic record of first son is but mediocre. July of 1952, in an American Legion baseball game, his 90-mile-per-hour brushback pitch beans opposing player who was then hospitalized for 10 days. Moral, beware of football quarterbacks masquerading as pitchers. Oh, Lord. Before 8,500 fans in Hartford, undefeated Trinity kicks off to Wesleyan. 5 Wesleyan kickoff is returned to the 20-yard line. 5 Wesleyan substitutes come on the field, 6 leave. However, one of the 6 hides inbounds near the sideline. First play from scrimmage, 80-yard touchdown, Rick to Denny Denault, and an upset victory. Moral, be deceitful if you want to stop an unbeaten streak. True fact, NCAA banned the sleeper play the following year because of that. June of 54, Rick tires of Wesleyan, enlists in the Army, spends 18 months in Tank Corps playing football in Germany. Moral, as a taxpayer, be sure you know what your money is being spent on. Oh, God. September 56, Rick tires of Army, returns to Wesleyan. In days of one platoon football, resumes collegiate career as excellent T-formation quarterback, punter, and place kicker, but ineffective, immobile defensive back. Moral, nobody's perfect. Spring of 58, again as a pitcher on the Wesleyan's baseball team, accompanies the team on Florida spring trip. Wildness continues to plague him. Finally opts for larger target area and letters in track as a javelin thrower for 2 years. Moral, if at first you don't succeed, try another sport. Graduates from Wesleyan, accepts his teaching and coaching position at Williston. That's in June of 58. Moral, one's loss is often another's gain. 12 of 64. Rick's Williston basketball team beats my Kingswood team in the final of the Kingswood Invitational Tournament by 4 points. Moral, blood is not thicker than water. Explain, Thanksgiving weekend visit, hit a few bars. My aim, learn about his great players. Wilazik, Zabik, Jiraki. We'd played 4 of his players man-to-man, then left the 5th man alone and played 1 man on the foul line to stop Wilazik's drives. It works. Roger fouls out with 2 minutes to play. We go back to the conventional defense, and Roger's substitute comes in and throws in 2 long bombs to beat us by 4 points. If I have 4 more pages, but I'm going to save them for 10 years from now. I'll close, and I agree with this 100%. I'm lucky. He's going to close with one additional cliche. You can pick your friends, but you can't pick your relatives. I assure you, this is Frosty speaking. I assure you that even if Rick and I were not related, Marilyn, Rick, and Barbara and I would be close friends. Congratulations, Rick. So I just want to end by thanking you all and saying thank you, Coach. And what Mom has gone through in the last 7 weeks is tough, but for the last week since I've been up here, we've looked forward to this. This is all we've wanted to do, and now it's come true, and you guys have been better than we ever thought. So I want to thank you, and I'm going to bring Griffin Boynton and Jeff Shergwin back up to play Sammy on the way out while Griffin speaks. Or Griffin sings, excuse me.